Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in this world. We're here with another special edition of WOWSA Live, interviewing our host, Ned Denison. Ned, how are you this morning or afternoon?
Doing great, Steve. Thank you.
And you have this big smile on your face because I think you've gone swimming for the first time in a few months.
I was out of action for about 7 weeks, and I'm back at Sandy Cove Island. I'm within the 5 kilometer distance that you can do exercise, and I'm just absolutely loving being back in the ocean.
And did you do a double workout yesterday?
I'm going twice a day.
Got it.
The distance isn't what I'd like, but I'm building up.
Got it. After all this time off, what your shoulders, your back, what's weakest?
So the water has warmed up, so the temperature is no problem. I think it's probably about 12 degrees Celsius. When I left, it was probably 10, so it feels warm.
Okay.
When I first got in the water, my body position felt completely wrong. Normally, I swim with my head a little bit up, which is a bad position. And for some reason, my head was looking down. My coach would have been delighted. She doesn't see that very often. And the left shoulder was just stiff. It was as if somebody had taped it 100 times. It's loosened up over the last day and a half now, so I'm getting happier. And my head's popping up so I can see what's happening.
Got it. Water polo style.
Water polo, not quite water polo style, but proper, alligator eyes, crocodile eyes.
Right. And during this lockdown, I mean, you've been limited to your home or a 2 kilometer radius, but you've been extremely busy reaching out to the community, doing these interviews. How have you spent your time in the last 2-3 months?
We went live with a new Marathon Hall of Fame website, which meant I was preparing 296 biographies and doing a lot of the technical work around that, greatly assisted by Christine, our webmaster. And you and I have been doing these interviews, so it's been absolutely fabulous to me. I've spoken to some honorees that I never spoke to before. I found every single interview to be interesting, and I've learned something every single time.
Yeah.
The last one that has me smiling is I know a couple of marathon swimmers had raised about $1 million for charity. We had Martin Vanderveen on yesterday. His last 2 swims, he raised $14 million for cancer research. Wow. $14 million. It's a staggering sum. Staggering sum.
And when you meet these people, and I listen to these interviews, I mean, the depth of these people is incredible. We see them because they've crossed a channel, they've won a race, they've pioneered the new swim. But when we have them in this lockdown scenario, when we're talking to them, what are you doing? What are your plans? It's been really profoundly inspirational.
And you get these incredible differences. Paul Azimuth and James Kegley, kind of were buddies on the professional circuit. Paul kind of described himself as 75% business at these events. Kegley described himself as, where's the adventure? Where are we going for a drink afterwards? And Kegley was an incredibly successful professional swimmer, but the different mindsets. Martin Vanderveen, the last 400 meters of the Olympic marathon in Beijing, he never thought he was going to win. He just wanted to kind of be there. And then it just opened up for him.
Yes.
And he says, look, I didn't really deserve to win. And some of the mentality is it's all over the place. And all of it makes sense when you talk to the person, but everyone is different.
Yes. And talking to the people, that's what you're excellent at. You're reaching out to community. You're creating this global community. And it was interesting to listen from you how these connections, these basically 1 or 2 degrees of connections, connects people from Hawaii and Cork, Greece, and Japan. And tell me your perspective of that connection.
So we have a sport that by all description is epic. At the same time, it's usually done in a niche fashion and has a global reach. So let me kind of describe that. So these are variable courses. They're never the same. The conditions differ. It's James was describing a couple of races in cold Quebec and then down to Cabo in, boiling water. We're racing across channels, around islands, point to point. And even when people are racing around the buoys, they're usually not necessarily 90 degrees. So, and there's always this little chance there might be some physical contact in the middle. So as a niche sport, we're normally swimming alone, sometimes in tandem, but most of the time there's fewer than 25 people at an event. Maybe you get 100 at something. This is very different than running a marathon where you've got 50,000 finishers, or the Barcelona Ironman with 2,000. When you have 10 to 50 individuals at an event, you get to know people. And, the number of times somebody said, "Oi, can I get a glob of Vaseline off you?" We have one of our swimmers, he never goes to an event without 9 cups and enough tea and biscuits for a small army. And he just makes sure that everybody has a hot drink. And at the same time, from those niche events, and I'll take SCAR as an example, or the Court Distance Week, any of these long distance training swims, you meet a bunch of people and then they absolutely scatter. They go all over the world and they do different swims. So the degree of separation in the sport, I think, is 2, not 6, it's 2. So, I met, Danny Lobo at a distance week. 6 months later, he called me up and he said, "Ned, there's a swim in Spain we should go to." Yep, let's do that. I met Elaine Howley in SCAR. A couple of years later, she visits Ireland. So this connection, it's a really niche sport. You get to meet people, but everywhere you go, you either meet that same person or their best friend. And one of the things that never ceases to amaze me, and I would encourage people to do it, is the number of swimmers that have the courage to make contact and say, "Hey, I'm going to be in Ireland in August. Where can I get a swim? Where's the pod of swimmers going to be on Saturday, the wherever?" And I make a few calls and I connect them with a local group, and they come back later and they say it was one of the best things on their vacation. And I do exactly the same when I'm traveling somewhere. I reach out and make sure that I can connect. We had Marcy McDonald on yesterday, and she said the group in Connecticut loves visitors. Please come and swim with her.
Yeah, I'm going to share share my screen. Tell me if you can see this.
I can see the chart now.
Okay.
This was a chart from one of the distance weeks we had in Cork. And I don't want to push the Cork Distance Week. There are about 20 of these around the world. I get good feedback on all of them. And it's 5 to 50 to 100 people coming together to train hard for marathon swimming for a weekend to, in our case, 9 days. This was one of the graphics done by Philip Hodges. So within, I think it was 100 days of the Distance Week, all of these people scattered, and these are the marathons they completed around the world within 100 days.
Wow.
We had one day where we had 7 people in the English Channel. 7. And the next day, somebody sent a message out, said, "I think I'm going to be fired. My boss said I spent the entire day watching ALS, yelling and doing Facebook posts." We had 7 people in the channel in the same day. Yeah. It was an unbelievable experience. So, and this is, we're pretty much a Northern Hemisphere group here, but we have a lot of people going down to Rottnest, a lot of people in Cape Town, more and more people going to Argentina. So it isn't just Northern Hemisphere.
And what I like about this is, when I look at this chart, when I think about the swims, I mean, there's places on this planet Earth I never knew existed. I didn't know the name of Rottnest. I had heard of Loch Ness, let's say, but, there's all kinds of bays and rivers and lakes. I had no idea. And it really expands my knowledge of the world. And then when I learn about the Spaniards and the Greeks and the Chinese winter swimmers and the Russian ice swimmers, I probably know more. I've learned more places in Siberia in the last few years than I learned in my entire school experience.
We had the one lady, Donna Galvin, middle at the bottom. She loved the chart, but she loved the fact that this graphic was on the back of the shirt the next year even more. So her picture was on the back of the shirt for ruling the world. She just thought that was just the most amazing thing. We haven't done another shirt like this. People are going, oh, I want to be on the shirt.
Who created this? Who created
It was created by Philip Hodges. He's got many claims to fame, but he's one of the few people to have swum all of the lochs in Scotland. He's middle up at the top.
Got it.
He created it. I was blown away by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I like about this is it's another layer of community. You know, we go to school and we have our high school friends, our college friends, our prep school friends. We might be on a sports team. Ned, you were outstanding All-American water polo player. So you had your buddies, you know, at Cal Berkeley, and I'm sure you keep in touch with those guys. But this is a whole nother level. This is, most people create a community when you're young. Your teenage years, your young 20s. This is a community that's really created for life. I mean, you know, for me, it's amazing. I want to share a few other pictures that you shared with me. Could you explain what this?
This next picture is the morning after the Hall of Fame celebration in Melbourne. There's about 8 swimming honorees in that picture. And we went for a 2K swim. We'd had a few drinks the night before at that yacht club right behind you. And, you know, it's great. I've swum with Sally Minty Gravitt, who's in the center there, 4 or 5 times in 5 different countries. And afterwards, we all went for breakfast. And it's just what a great feeling, you know, after a big formal celebration.
Yes, yes. And what also is really interesting, I see just to Sally's left or right, depending on your perspective, Yuko Matsuzaki from Japan.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, you know, Yuko, born and raised in Japan, her English vocabulary is impeccable when it comes to swimming. And is less so in the rest of the world. And I see that often. I could meet someone who speaks Portuguese, who speaks a different language, but the words of swimming are common.
I'm not sure if it was her or somebody else gave me a bit of grief because we had a 10K race the day before and Trent only swam 5. And I might have described that I was stroke to stroke with Trent. And when somebody questioned Trent about it, he said he absolutely confirmed it. He said, "Yep, for that one stroke as I went by him, we were stroke for stroke."
And just to remind everybody who may not know who Trent Grimsey is, just remind us who he is.
He set the English Channel record a couple of years ago at well under 7 hours.
Yes.
He wasn't in the best of shape, but trust me, he had no trouble going by me.
Yeah. And Ned explained this photo.
This is the induction in Windsor. I think it was 2018. And on the stage are all of the honorees. And there's another 50 people in the audience. So from in the middle, we've got Albert Coward, who's the older gentleman, standing next to Polyane Okamoto, a medalist in Rio. You know, different continents, different age groups. On the other side of Albert, you've got Rohan Moore from India. I had the pleasure of sitting at the table with Rohan and his friends and family, who were just, you know, the whole lot of them beaming with pride for the entire time. So these are people that, if I'm lucky enough, I see them when I travel the world. Unfortunately, the Capri Naples swim was postponed this year, but I was going to be staying with Albert for an evening and his wife.
Got it.
I might get him in September, but
yeah.
A great gathering.
Yeah, these are the swimmers themselves. And
swimmers, administrators, coaches.
Yeah, and behind them are, or not behind them, literally, figuratively behind them are pilots, coaches, feeders, pace swimmers, kayakers. They're
administrators,
master swimming coaches. I mean,
yeah.
Explain that extended family.
So I think we have a team of extended support is probably the best way to describe it. Every interview we've done, we've not had a single swimmer that said, "Yes, I was the man, I was the woman, I was out there for 15 hours and I didn't get any help and it was all me. You know, you got people like Philip Rush, who, in completing the fastest ever three-way English Channel, gave the winning Rolex to his boat pilot as an appreciative small gesture. So that the swimmers will tell you that the coach that yelled at them at 5 hours, that commiserated at 10 hours, begged them at 14 hours, and at 16 hours said something like, hey, I didn't come halfway around the world for you to get out of the water. I don't want to hear it. I want you to swim some more. We'll talk about it at the next feed. Those swimmers get out of the water and they say, couldn't have done it without them. The whole lot of them.
Yeah. What really strikes me about this photograph is you have people like Poliana Okimoto from Brazil. You have Pilar Guejo from Argentina. You have some fast swimmers.
Yep.
Some of the fastest swimmers in the world. Yet the heroes in our sport include older people, slower people, adventurers who do a swim for the first time ever. Stephen Redmond with Fastnet, for example.
Bring up your next picture and we'll see the big smile on Pat Gallant-Charat, I think, at in San Francisco at your gathering for WOWSA a couple of years ago. Pat is, she started, that's the one, she started open water swimming later in life. She set the records for the oldest to do just about everything. She found out a few minutes before that picture was taken that she was being inducted into the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We talked about Trent, who's the fastest across the English Channel, and he got a reasonable amount, appropriate amount of kudos, you know. However, when Jackie Coble went across the English Channel in 28 hours thereabouts, Jackie was an international superstar. So the glory that came to the slowest was actually much better, much bigger than the glory that came to the fastest. One of the things that happens is that people will approach me and they'll say, look, I've done a 5K, I want to do a 10K, and I have my eye on the channel in 5 years. And I said, great. I encourage them. And then the first thing I do is I try to get them one or more mentors. And this is really important. I ask them, you know, what age they are, do they have kids, what speed, what their mental approach are. We talked to Attila Manioki. He is on competition. You speak to somebody else and they just, we're going to get there. And then what I do is I try to find them good mentors. So I try to find them a 50-year-old woman with 3 teenage kids who's 2 or 3 years ahead of them in the journey. Because sometimes I don't necessarily remember what it's like to go from 5K to 10K, but somebody who did it 2 years earlier of a similar mentality, similar speed. We introduced a woman in Florida, I think it was last year, to another swimmer in Florida. She drove 4 hours across the state just to have coffee with her mentor for the first time. And she came out of there and she said, okay, now I think I have a half a chance. Now I have somebody to talk to who understands what I'm doing. And the other thing I would say to swimmers is, you know, pick your events carefully. Try to arrive a day or two early. Stay a day or two later. Pre-arrange to meet people. When I went to swim Rottnest, I was fortunate enough to be able to stay on the island for a week. But when I got back to Perth, I had arranged to have dinner with as many of the English Channel solo swimmers from Perth as I could find. We had a great, so they threw us out of the restaurant. Everybody was talking, everybody was smiling. And those are my friends for life now.
Yes, yeah. And you said something a while ago that really struck me is you had swum, I believe, across False Bay down in South Africa where there's plenty of sharks. And you did it and some man said to you or some individual said to you, gosh, I've been thinking about that swim for 20 years. What is your perspective of having a dream for 20 years?
So what he actually said, he was local and he said, I've been waiting for the perfect day for 25 years. And I couldn't really process it. When I went down there, I had, I think 9 days or something. I said to the boat pilot, look, we're not going to get a perfect day. I want a day that's possible. And if it's not possible, I want to at least swim across half of it in impossible. Let's get wet. It wasn't, swimming False Bay wasn't changing my life necessarily. I wasn't going to get promoted. I wasn't going to win $1 million. I wasn't going to be beaten to death. But I wanted to get wet. I wanted to have a go at it. After the swim, I really wanted a shirt. I really wanted a shirt. But it's a bit bold to make a shirt for yourself. So I was the 5th swimmer to do it. So I found the sizes of the previous 4 swimmers, and I got the sizes of the various crew that was involved. I got a bunch of shirts made up, and I posted them all over the world. Unfortunately, there was a postal strike in South Africa for about 3 months. And the first swimmer was the honorary Annemie Landmeters from Belgium. I had never had contact with her until this shirt arrived. And she was absolutely blown away. She won't be doing an interview with her, but I heard from her a couple of days ago, and I let her know that the great white sharks, the 200 great white sharks in the bay, they're all gone now because there's a few orcas in that tend to eat the livers of great whites. So it's not quite the same swim, but still only 5, and it's been a few years.
Now, you recognized and honored your predecessors in False Bay, but you've been at the forefront of honoring people, whether it's ice swimming, marathon swimming, over in Vermont. Can you explain the different ways that our community honors people, recognizes their achievements?
Yeah, so we have the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, which is for marathon swimmers. That's the ultimate place to be. We created an Ireland Marathon Hall of Fame a few years ago. There's a Vermont Open Water Hall of Fame, and our honorees are in hundreds and hundreds of sports halls of fame all over the world. It could be the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame for honoree George Duffy, who organized the Canadian National Exhibition for years. And then the Queen of England has bestowed a number of MBEs on our swimmers and 1 OBE, which is a big honor for them. Lewis Pugh has received a similar honor in South Africa. Susie Maroney, a similar honor in Australia. Vicky Keith, Canadian Merit, another similar honor. So we try to record those for the various swimmers. The other thing that happens is there are now more and more historic records appearing on the internet. And Steve, your daily posts up in Waterpedia, the Marathon Swim Federation, the organizers are getting better and better at this. So you can actually drill back to 1958, and you can see the results of the Butlins cross-channel race. And then I think the other thing that I just absolutely love is we had 81-year-old Barry Watson on a couple of weeks ago, and Barry broke the English Channel record about 40 years ago. He didn't think anybody remembered. We remembered. We've got Merv Sharp on in a couple of days. I think Merv went to the Channel Swimming Association dinner last year. They do something very special 50 years after somebody had done an English Channel. And here in Ireland, we brought back the class of 2005 for a 15-year reunion. We had, I think, 6 soloers and 35 relayers. We all got back together as part of a bigger celebration. And it's the first time that some of those people had seen each other in 15 years. So, keeping these old records, honoring the people involved is a big part of sports history.
Yeah. And what's amazing when I hear of the swims from Linda McGill, Barry Watson, Vicky Keith, they describe their swim as if it was yesterday. A swim they did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was literally, they describe it as if they would have done it yesterday. They remember the time, they remember the conditions, they remember when they hit a cold spot. I mean, it seems to me that this marathon swimming community is burnished in your DNA. I mean, it's memorable for life.
It's more than that. I could sense Linda McGill wincing when I talked to her about how easy it must have been to swim in a shark cage across Port Phillip Bay in Melbourne. And you could like wincing, and she says, I still think I've got broken fingers from that swim. Or she went to Capri, Naples, and her swim is on the website, but it's not categorized because her observer was deathly ill for 5 hours in a horizontal position, was not in a position to witness the swim. And so Linda just went, look, such is life. The crew gets sick. You go with it. She's not, you're not harboring it, not bitter, anything like that. Paul Asmuth remembers distinctly. Sorry, Paul, it's about the third time I'm having a go. At the 24-hour relay, two-person relay race in Canada, he said at like 4 o'clock in the morning, he was so cold that he and James Kegley had agreed, 3 laps each, 3 laps each, 3 laps each. He said, I made him do 4. And he's still appropriately feeling a bit of guilt on that, Paul. But yeah, it's fresh in their mind. These were, in many cases, life-changing events. And I know some people will do the New York City Marathon running race, and it's a life-changing event. But I think marathon swimming is something extra special. You can't just stop and sit down.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, just to pick on Paul, since we're picking on Paul, I remember precisely the situation where he passed me towards the end of the race in the Manhattan Island swim. I remember very precisely. He came up on the right side. He caught me at a vulnerable time, and he
you were stroke to stroke for the one stroke, though, right?
No, I was ahead of him for at least 21, 22 miles. But somebody like that, a very sharp, obviously one of the greats in the world. I was happy. I felt I was successful because I was ahead of him. Just like when you were going to stroke with Trent, here is, a world champion, renowned swimmer at the NCAA world community, aspiring to go to the 1980 Olympics. I get to swim with him. That was cool. And so the memories, even though he did pass me, even though I did lose, my remembrance of that passing defeat, if you will, was positive. And I see all these people in this picture from the Hall of Fame dinner, and I mean, their faces are just beaming, and they have so many stories. And
we had a couple that I won't give the names, but we had an occurrence in Scotland in whatever year it was, and 2 guys they lit up when they saw each other, and the man from Serbia said, "It must be 30 years since I've seen you." And man from the Netherlands patted his stomach and he said, "And 30 kilos." It was absolutely, I still smile and laugh about that. Yeah. We've had people, Chris Geesden and I think Dr. Chris Stockdale, when they met in Windsor, I think the last time they had seen each other is when they were both starting their English Channel swim in 1977. They hadn't seen each other since.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Also thinking about all these swims, I mean, you could be in Capri, Napoli, English Channel, Catalina, you name it, Lake St. Jean, and you can have a swimmer from the 50s, 60s speaking toe-to-toe, thinking about one race versus another, 50 years apart. Yes, that water was cold. Yes, the winds came up. How did you feel? And there's this immediate connection that is just beyond, how do you take off lanolin? That's been an issue forever. I mean, it's
easier in the Isle of Jersey than it is in Cork, Ireland, because the temperature is warmer. It doesn't come off in Cork, Ireland. But you're right. The 5 swimmers who swam across False Bay, we have a connection that is so special. In Ireland, there's 2 of us that swam around an island off the west coast. He was my crew on my swim, and then showing absolutely no good humor, he broke my speed record, which I never forgive him for. I'm tempted to go back and see if I can wrestle it back. We've done something that no one else in the world has done. Nothing. No one has ever done that except the 2 of us.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're not lining up to do it. It's an ugly swim.
it's actually not necessary because there's so many places around the world that have yet to be swum. I mean, we had last year alone, we had Pitcairn Island. We had Easter Island being swum around. I mean, these are places that are difficult to get to in any case, yet people are finding local people. I mean, going down to the docks and talking to fishermen and talking to people who spend their life on the ocean. How do I do this? And
I had a casual involvement in Wayne Suter's swim in
yes,
kind of the North Channel a few years ago. The North Channel, the narrowest part was tried many, many years ago by, for example, Mercedes Gleitz and Honoré, and it was determined to be impossible because the currents were too severe there. So the actual North Channel swim is much longer than the narrowest point. It makes some sense. So this guy, Wayne Suter from South Africa, who's not known for his blinding speed, he's got a great smile, great sense of humor, and he bought me a pint once, so I love him. He decided he wanted to do this impossible swim. So he found this boat guy who I had met before, and Wayne, he knew where he wanted to finish, which, you know, like when you're going across a place with severe currents, getting to any bit of rock is good enough. You don't worry about where you finish. And sure enough, not only did Wayne complete the swim, but Wayne landed at exactly the point he wanted to land. And so one of the things that I love about this sport is how we're kind of 99% positive and people are always congratulating everybody. Yes, I called Wayne Suter. However, I called the boat pilot first. And I said, you do know it's impossible to get a swimmer across that bit of water. This is afterwards. He said, so I've heard. And he said, and you know, no one in their right mind would try to predict where they're going to land because that's impossible. He says, I was told that as well. And I just went, you're a superstar, mate. Like, I don't know how you possibly could have done it. Then I called Wayne. I said, look, I'm a bit tired from congratulating your pilot. I'll just say, good job, Wayne. I've seen him a couple of times since, but that swim was impossible. Couldn't be done. Yes. And Wayne just decided he was going to do it, did a tremendous amount of research, studied the thing to no end, found a great crew, and delivered. A superstar.
And the other thing that I like is asking people what they like to eat or drink. I mean, you know, we hear stories about swimmers who dip sugar cubes in whiskey. We hear Abu Heath famously, you know, eating a lot of chicken. And now we have these scientifically...
lots of chickens, not a lot of chickens. Lots of chickens.
We had another guy who he used potato chips to settle down his stomach. Potato chips and Coke. And now we have gel packs and GPS and all these things. It's amazing to me how the people in the 20th century, 19th century did things. I mean, you know, we think about it's impossible. For them, they didn't even have pools, you know, to train in.
I interviewed Herman Wilmsy, the great champion from the late 50s, early 60s, the Dutchman. And he said a couple of things that just struck me. He said he drank Coca-Cola and ate baby food. And when he did his training, he trained in a canal. And he said he trained fat burning. Because they didn't have they didn't have the science of knowing what you would eat. So you weren't burning your fat. So he trained into, you know, burning fat in fatigue. He trained that way. He wasn't popping up every 20 minutes to have a shot of Bob's gel or whatever this stuff is now anymore.
Yeah.
He'd swim for 4 or 5 hours until it was nearly done. Yes. And that's how we trained. And if you go back far enough, they were swimming in, you know, wool vests and drinking brandy and smoking cigars.
Yes, yeah. If there are 3 or 4 things that are on the top of your mind when a new swimmer comes to you and says, Ned, I want to get into this sport, what are those 2 or 3 things, whether it's dry land or in the water, emotional or physical?
So the first thing I would say to them is you need to do some meters. Okay, you need to do some meters. Don't be studying the sport on dry land for 5 years without getting wet. You need to get wet and you need to do some meters. The second thing I say to people is read everything you can. don't necessarily believe everything, but read everything. Your mindset, your speed is probably not going to be the same as Marsha Cleveland. So by all means, read the book Dover Solo, but understand that Marsha's in a different world when it comes to speed and determination. So read it for as Marsha's account, but don't necessarily follow it. Find your mentors. There are so many sources today. Hopefully people are listening to these interviews and picking up some tips. Hopefully people are going to Open Waterpedia. Hopefully people are following their famous blogs. I'm on some Facebook groups, million meters this year. Did you swim this year? Most of this, I would say 99% of all the social media stuff that I see is positive. And then I tell people, find training partners. There's nothing better than swimming with somebody that's 2% faster than you. Nothing better. And then I have my I think I've been quoted on this. I have my one famous quote now. And for everybody's always asking, how do you know how much training you have to do for this thing? And they get 20 different opinions, and I go, I'm the only one that knows for sure. And I tell them, when you're standing, let's say it's Dover, when you're standing on Shakespeare's Beach in Dover, you need to have the mental and physical confidence that you're going to make it. Now, for some people, that's 15,000 meters a week. For other people, it's 70,000 meters a week. For some people, they need a professional psychiatrist and hypnotist. For other people, they say, well, look, I've done, 200-mile road races over giant mountains. I think my mind will be okay for most of it. Usually is.
Great. That's great. Well, Ned, this, like I always said to you, I could spend hours and hours just listening to you and throwing stories out and etc. But I think I'll leave this with Kevin Murphy's famous quote. Let's just go out for a little dip.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.